The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the Accent Radio Network or the staff, management, and sponsors of this radio station.
Hello, Mr. and Mrs. America, and to all our ships at sea. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerry Hughes. Welcome to Straight Talk from ARN. 8662-ACCENT or email Jerry at accentradionetwork.com. By the way, this is the Second Amendment hour of Straight Talk on Wednesdays in the second hour of our broadcast. And the co-host of our program is the owner of Family Firearms in a new location, which we'll be telling you about, in Brandon, Florida, Mr. Marco Caporale. Hello, sir.
How you doing, Jerry?
Doing well, sir. I hope you are.
Yes, we are doing pretty good. Still middle of construction, which should be done in a little bit, but still trying to do the everyday as usual.
Getting settled in. It's always a difficult thing, but a fun thing.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. All right. By the way, you're going to have shooting ranges open there, right?
Yes, sir. We will actually have a state-of-the-art shooting range, just under 20 yards, total of 9 lanes. And we will probably be one of the first, at least in the area that we know of, that we have a specific designated lane for those who want to draw from concealment, which will be barricaded off from all the other lanes by a solid-filled concrete block wall. That way people don't have to fear that if you have an accidental shooting that their safety would be compromised.
Very good. Can I target practice there with my dual-shot, two-shot Derringer 50 caliber BMG?
Actually, well, the 50 BMG we can't. Unfortunately, we can go up to 3,600 feet per second, which basically is like a 308, a little bit harder than that.
Okay.
The big bore guys will be probably left to us for after hours, where we can test and have some fun.
Okay, very good. All right. So my two-shot Derringer 50 caliber, just you'd have to wait on that.
Yeah, you'd have to wait on that.
Oh, okay. All right. I've never shot it. I don't know how it has recoil. I'm sure it does.
Oh, I'm pretty sure. I definitely think it'll push you back quite far.
I don't think anybody would be brave enough to shoot a 50 cal BMG Derringer, do you?
No, I definitely wouldn't do it.
Not hardly. All right, let me get us started here. 4 words. Ready?
Yes.
Treyvon Martin, George Zimmerman. That
is one of the hottest topics that, especially in Florida, but around the country right now over the last couple of weeks.
And I'd like to discuss this thing, and I don't want it to be a love fest or anything along that line. So, I have my opinions, as I'm sure you have yours as well. But if you'd like, I'll be the devil's advocate on this, and I'll take one side or the side that you don't want. You want to do that?
We can do that. I got to tell you, probably just like yourself, I have to say, first and foremost, I think it's a tragedy that this has happened to a 17-year-old kid, adult, however you want to call it, but he's 17. The second thing is I think it's a huge travesty that could unfold within our justice system, because you have people on both sides that are already making up their minds without any evidence and the minimal amount of evidence that is needed to even determine what has happened. So I don't think I don't think you're going to have to fight me to be either devil's advocate or the love side. So.
All right, then what I may do is just go back and forth, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Let me start with this premise. Based on what you think you know, and understand, ladies and gentlemen, this is based on what we think we know. Based on what you think you know, where do you come down on this?
Well, I got to say, the first and foremost, I know a lot of people are talking about the stand your ground issue right at hand, with Florida. And with what I know right now, I do not know if the stand your ground or if that law even applies in this situation.
Right.
And I know that a lot of people are saying, or at least assuming that it does, and therefore trying to make the claim that it needs to be changed or repealed. I still have not determined whether this actually involves stand your ground. We have a lot of issues at hand.
Let me throw out 2 or 3 of the issues that I see that are causing a problem here. A couple of problems. And I'll start on the side of George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman has been described by some as a hot dog. You know what a hot dog is? Most of us know what a hot dog is. A hot dog is a guy who is gun happy. who is looking for a confrontation, who, there goes an accident just waiting to happen kind of thing. One. Two, George Zimmerman took it upon himself to play cop here, and to not just to report the suspicious activity of an alleged suspicious person, but to follow him and play detective and so on. Seems to me that those two issues go a long way in complicating this thing. Had one, he'd not had the background and the reputation of being somewhat of an aggressive person, and two, had he not been having a desire to play cop, some of the controversy that we're involved in here would not even be around.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, I got to tell you, the first thing that we saw in the news was, of course, and we can go in whether or not, for example, NBC did, in fact, cut the actual 911 recording to tailor their story versus what actually happened. But,
well, in fact, they've apologized for that now, so they've admitted they did and have issued a kind of a light apology.
Yeah, a light apology saying that it was an issue more of the with putting the tapes together for the broadcast versus that they specifically did that. Yeah. Let's take that aside. However, when you look at this, I got to tell you, from my personal opinion, if I were to call 911, and in the case of Zimmerman, you call 911, you explain what it is that you're seeing, and when 911 says don't worry about following him, the police are on their way, I understand that he is the watchman for the neighborhood. But at the same time, in that respect, I don't think that I would actually follow the kid and go to the extent that he did. Had he not done that, allowed for law enforcement to actually come on the scene, they might have, if you want to be on one side of it, they might have caught him in the act and breaking in another house if he, in fact, was responsible for all of the other burglaries. Mm-hmm. Or they would have seen just a regular kid walking through that had no business being there, but obviously wasn't a threat to anybody. There would not be a shooting in that instance. I didn't see where Zimmerman should have gone the extra route and followed him.
Let me nitpick here a little bit. The 911 operator, I don't know, because I don't know who the 911 operator is. As I understand it, in some areas, the 911 operators are just normal everyday people manning the 911 phones, trained to do the job. And in other areas, they are actually deputies, given a special deputy status. But here's my nitpick. If indeed, and we know from the 911 that he was told not to follow this person, if indeed he did go ahead and follow the person, as apparently he did, could he be charged with failure to obey a lawful command?
That's a really good question. To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. If I'm not mistaken, at least in the state of Florida, with the 911, I'm not sure whether this was a deputy or not. I do know that, for example, if you call non-emergency numbers, you obviously have an actual deputy, not just a clerical person answering the phones.
Right.
And in that instance, again, taking that aside, an individual should look at this and see, well, what was the most prudent thing to do? I realize, even if he was a hothead, I realize that if you are, again, watching the neighborhood and you have a suspicious character that is in the neighborhood, if you have identified them and at least know where they are, where they're going, and he did instruct the 911 operator that he was at some point out of his sight, you've done your job. If you are seeing that the individual is, going closer to a residence or anything like that, or again, I wrestle with the issue of he should have not followed it. But, okay, he did. So now I think we need to get on to step two, because he didn't break a law by following the individual, and I think some people forget that.
Good point, and let's take it one step further, and this is, of course, that one of the largest words in the English dictionary, if, I-F, 2 letters. If he had not followed, and Treyvon Martin indeed had assaulted someone or had caused serious injury to someone, folks might have been saying, well, why didn't you allow him to continue following, or why didn't you let him keep an eye so he could report what's going on? So it's kind of a no-win situation there.
It is. It's a no-win situation. I think that it would be hard-pressed for the crowd, hard-pressed for society to come in and say, well, this individual, yes, they notified 911 operators. The authorities were contacted, and they were coming onto the scene. If he did assault somebody else, Treyvon did assault somebody else, I think it'd be even harder pressed for them to go after the 911 operator, the county, the city, the state, saying, well, you should have done more. They did what they needed to do. If you're going to take an individual citizen and then almost, I wouldn't even say deputize, but provide them with the opportunity and the ability to follow this individual, they haven't had any training. They have no authority necessarily to really detain the individual or arrest them. And so now you're not only putting the one individual that was hurt, let's say, but now you're going to throw in a second subject, Zimmerman, who wouldn't have to be hurt if he wasn't in that situation, and then you have two. So I don't necessarily think two is better than one. Like I said, it's a slippery slope. Like you said, if is a very difficult word.
And not only that, I have seen situations not totally unlike this, and 911 calls, where someone is following perhaps an armed robber or someone who has assaulted or kidnapped, and the police do not say don't follow, they say don't get too close. Tell us what he's doing. Where is he now? And they basically encourage the continued reporting of the incident rather than saying break away and just sit there.
Yeah, well, I think in that case, and obviously it's not as cut and dry, but in that situation, you've got where an actual criminal activity has occurred.
Right.
And therefore, yes, follow, don't stay too close. In this instance, you have basically an individual that has viewed another individual, and they have the assumption that that Treyvon is, one that either was involved in the burglary. It looks suspicious, but he was never there to determine. Yes, this kid came out of a house, or he has a bag full of stuff, or he's running, or you know what I'm saying. So it's very unclear the steps leading up to what happened.
All right, we're going to pause for a couple of minutes. When we come back, let's move to the incident itself, and I'm talking now the actual shooting incident, because there is something here. There's this 800-pound gorilla in the room, as they say, or elephant in the room, whatever you want to call it, that is not being talked about a whole lot, and I'm wondering specifically why, as to the legality or illegality of this shooting. When we continue, Straight Talk from ARN.
Listening to the radio, driving in your car. Radio gets results.
Over the course of a week, radio reaches more than 228 million people. That's 94% of all people aged 12 and older. And radio doesn't take the weekend off. More than 182 million people, or 75% of Americans over 12, tune into radio on Saturday and Sunday. How do you take advantage of that? Advertise. Support your local radio station and promote your product or service at the same time. To advertise nationally, call Accent Radio Network at 866-222-2368. Toll free, 866-2-ACCENT.
Just a few short years back, delivery of media, information of all types, was actually pretty limited. Take, for instance, radio. If your favorite station wasn't in your town or at least nearby, pumping out some serious watts, and you had a substandard radio receiver with an equally pathetic antenna, your listening pleasure wasn't happening. Well, that's changed. Big time. With the World Wide Web, satellites, and the advancement in technology, someone in, let's say, Nairobi can hear a broadcast from Denver, Colorado. Accent Radio Network wants to let you and any of your friends or family know that you can be anywhere in the world and listen to our broadcast. If you have internet access and audio, beyond the sky is the limit.
Go to accentradionetwork.com. Click and listen. Plug your head into vital information. That's accentradionetwork.com.
Welcome back to the Second Amendment Hour of Straight Talk. Marco Caporelli of Family Firearms is online with us, talking about the Treyvon Martin George Zimmerman case. Before we get into the actual shooting, let me go to the situation involving young Treyvon Martin. We don't know. But would you agree with me that if the only offense that Trayvon Martin actually truly committed in the mind of George Zimmerman was walking while black, then we got a real problem?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a real problem at that point, and I know that, for example, Pam Bondi and Governor Rick Scott obviously put a specific prosecutor. I don't necessarily know if they decided to choose that or if they were forced to because the original prosecutor had recused himself, but I do know that not only is the grand jury looking at this, but I know that the Department of Justice is looking at it as a hate crime.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's important. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who claim, well, who says it's a hate crime? I mean, obviously, there are individuals out there that are stating this is a black-on-white issue, although Zimmerman obviously was later identified as a Hispanic. But no one is necessarily stating it is. I think that the state is looking at it and saying we just want to cover all of our bases because you know that that's where it's going to go next, depending on how the results come out as to whether or not it was a self-defense shooting or not.
Well, for the most part, one of the things that we must understand is that Mr. Zimmerman comes from a multiracial family comprised primarily, as I understand it, of Latino and black. So I think, it's just my opinion, I would think it would be more unlikely that there would be a racial motivation there, although, again, we don't know at this point. But certainly there are people, and let's be honest about it, right now the people who are the only people whom I have seen or heard yelling, playing the race card here, are what I call poverty pimps and race baiters who make their living off of this kind of thing. There's tremendous money in poverty and tremendous money in race. And some of these players use these kinds of things just to for self-aggrandizement purposes and remuneration, gratification, if you will, in that regard. All right, now let me go to George Zimmerman and the shooting. And as I say, this 800-pound monster in the room here. And disagree with me if you will, if I'm wrong. Under the law, not the stand your ground law, just the general law, under the law, as I understand it, if at any time George Zimmerman truly perceived that his life was in danger or his physical well-being was in danger, if he truly believed that, then he was absolutely justified in this shooting. Yea or nay?
Yeah, well, I mean, if he truly felt that there was it was severe bodily harm, injury, and or death,
clear and present danger.
Yeah, then he was well within his right, and I think that's the crux of the issue. Is we're not talking about the fact that whether or not he was supposed to pursue him or not. We're not necessarily talking about why Trayvon was in the area or not, and whether he was involved with the burglaries or not. We're talking about the instance that actually happened, and the discussion needs to be: what does the evidence show as to Zimmerman defending himself against Trayvon because Trayvon had attacked him? That's what we're talking about. That's the incident. Did Trayvon actually attack him? And if so, was Zimmerman justified in using deadly force? Absolutely, regardless of what happened beforehand. That's the instance we're talking about. But if there was no clear thought of severe bodily harm, injury, or death, then stand your ground, justifiable use of force, all of that is out the window. Zimmerman cannot use that, and he faces a mandatory sentence of 25 years to life in prison.
So as I understand it again, if a reasonable person would have or be able to conclude that my life is in danger, that my physical well-being is threatened, and I therefore have the right to respond, if a reasonable person could make that assumption based on what happened, then whomever it might be would be justified in the use of a firearm.
Well, yes, they would be allowed to use, and again, what I always try to stress to everybody is the justifiable use of force, it's not a 0 to 180 degree.
Yeah.
It's not, well, if I feel threatened, I can use my gun. It actually states that you can use any force, up to and including deadly force. That's an extremely important part of the statute, because all of the anti-gun people are claiming, well, this is basically a law to allow anybody to kill anybody if you feel that there's a threat, not even if a threat is in fact given. But what we try to stress to everybody is, no, that's not what we're talking about. And the statute says you can use force that you need to, and if needed, you can use deadly force. Just like if you're getting into a physical altercation with an individual, you fight back. You don't just take your gun out and shoot them unless it escalates to the point where you know that death is going to happen.
Let me pick up on something you said there, and it's to me, very, very important. And again, this is nitpicking a little bit, but I think it is a very important nitpick. It's not a 0 to 60 automatically, as you say. I am aware of people, and I have seen instances, not personally seen them, but I've seen reports of instances, where, let's say, an individual who is 5'10" and 150 pounds confronts an individual who is 6'3" and 300 pounds. That person who is 6'3" and 300 pounds would be justified in shooting or in stopping an attack before the first punch is thrown if that much larger person has a health condition that a single punch could kill them, that just the stress of an altercation could cause a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. And I mean, this is an imminent thing, not, well, it might do it. I'm talking about a person has a legitimate health condition that they simply cannot get into a confrontation. That there, the threat level or the fear of physical hurt and harm would be much lower than it would be on two people who are somewhat compatible in the sense of their physical condition. I want to get your thoughts on that when we continue here. We're going to break at the bottom of the hour for about 3 minutes. Marco Caporale is with us on the Second Amendment Hour of Straight Talk from ARN.
No matter what you do, I will always be
Welcome back to the Second Amendment Hour of Straight Talk from ARN. I'm Terry Hughes, and on board with us is our co-host, Marco Caporale of Family Firearms in Brandon. Marco, I recall some years back there was a rapper in the music industry. I want to say his name was Heavy D. I could be wrong on that name. Don't hold me to that. But he was a very large gentleman. He was sleeping. He was taking a nap on a couch. He rolled off the couch, and the fall from the couch to the floor killed him because of his body mass. There are people, I can kind of relate to that, there are people that a single punch would kill them. Somebody on crutches, somebody in a wheelchair would have a hard time with a fair fight. Someone with a single arm or a single leg. Someone with possibly some type of mental disorder that stress could cause a seizure. In those instances, am I correct that the threat level would escalate much more quickly and there'd be a lower level of threat than, say, an average situation?
Well, I mean, I think it is correct to believe that yes, because again, one of the things is the threat doesn't have to be visible. They don't have to have a weapon, and if you do have some sort of physical ailment that would preclude you from having, whether you want to call it a fair fight or a standard ability to fight back.
To withstand an attack, yes.
Yeah, then absolutely. But I will say this. I know that there's been arguments as to whether, the discrepancy between how large Treyvon was as far as weight versus how Zimmerman was.
Right.
They claim that Treyvon was 200 pounds, Zimmerman is 170, and so therefore, Zimmerman wouldn't be able to withstand it. And it comes back that he's 160 versus 170, and they're fairly in the same size. But I got to tell you, in today's modern world, that doesn't mean anything because you have young kids that are taking mixed martial arts.
Sure. That
physically they are no larger than, let's say, an adult, and they're under the age of 16, and yet could do some severe damage to the adult simply because of the knowledge, not the physicalness, but the knowledge of that individual.
What I'm talking about specifically, though, let's say, again, an 18-year-old, very good health, is about to violently attack a 72-year-old in a wheelchair. There's no way that a 72-year-old paraplegic could defend themselves in a wheelchair in any type of fist-to-cuff situation. It's not going to happen. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not.
So in that kind of situation, would the wheelchair-bound person, would it be a righteous situation if they said, look, I couldn't afford to even take a hit. I had to pull my gun and protect my life. Thankfully, I didn't have to use it, but I had to insinuate deadly force or threaten it just to keep the altercation from happening.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see that. I think that it's definitely going to take both the prosecution as well as the defense in arguing that to make sure that, yes, we agree that due to whatever the ailment or the nature
right.
is, that, yeah, I definitely think so. I think even if they did go to trial, I would assume that almost any jury would look at it and say, yeah, the 72-year-old guy that has a ticker problem is not going to last, that 18-year-old individual
right.
just pouncing on him. I honestly can see that. But, yeah,
it simply goes back to your thing of 0 to 60, but it just doesn't happen. 1 second, everything's okay. The next second, deadly force.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't. Again, you can use other methods. I mean, for example, if Zimmerman really thought that that Treyvon was one of the individuals that was involved in all the break-ins and he confronted him, if in fact there was no physical altercation, why didn't he have pepper spray and spray him in the face till he was dripping?
Or a taser gun.
Yeah, instead of using your firearm. Obviously, we were not there. The one witness, from my understanding, that was near a window or outside of a window, has not come forward to let him know it, but yet he had made statements, or the individual made statements, that they saw Zimmerman on his back. Mm-hmm. I know that there's arguments as to whether or not some of the video of him going into the law enforcement precinct shows that, in fact, he did not have any of the lacerations on the back of his head and his nose was bleeding. But you can clearly, I pulled up the report today, and you can clearly see where the law enforcement officers all agreed and had stated the lacerations. I mean, before he went to jail, before they handcuffed him and detained him, they had to make sure he was cleared by the fire department medics that were there. So, again, the biggest issue I think we have is too many people were ready to hang both of them dry without looking at any of the evidence, and it's making them all look like fools now that more evidence is coming about.
All right, I want to broaden this out just a little bit, but it's still going to come down kind of on George Zimmerman a little bit here. And this is just me. One of the things that we do on this program is we tell the truth, or what we believe to be the truth, even if it's not comfortable. From what I think I know, and I want to be very clear on that, from what I think I know, if I were the person who had to sign off on Mr. Zimmerman having a gun, I wouldn't have given it to him. I do believe that there is an element, unfortunately, among those of us who are strong Second Amendment supporters, that there is an element out there of the hot dog, the overly aggressive, the almost sometimes being a jerk, if you will, in the sense of an attitude with a firearm. Thank God it is a very small percentage from what I have seen, but I have seen it time and time again, where there are some people who just should not be allowed to carry one around because they can't wait to use it, it seems. And those folks scare me. Now, I'm not in the business, and I don't instruct, and I don't have near the knowledge and the expertise that you have. But am I that far off base? Is there not an element there? Be hard to put your finger on it on size, but I've seen it time and time again, both among individual people as well as police officers, that who just their mental makeup is just not right to have a firearm.
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely some trigger, and pardon my pun, but there's definitely some trigger phrases. There's some language, some physical things that you can see in an individual as to whether or not they have the right mind, or the right attitude, I should say. Not the right mind, but the right attitude to carry a firearm. But here's the bigger part of it. Here's the problem. The problem is one, who is anybody to determine whether or not an individual and we'll make the assumption, and it can be made on both sides, that if they're getting a carry permit, it's to carry every day, or whether it is that I just don't want to wait 3 days to have a firearm for protection in my house.
Yeah.
Who is to say that that individual does not have the right to have a firearm for protection? And then if there is going to be some way to determine whether you can or cannot have it, who is to say that who's going to determine and what the parameters are going to be if you're going to have psychological testing and things like that? You got a slippery slope that you're about to go down because it's an invasion of the right to protect yourself. And I will tell you from personal experience in the 3 years at least that we've been in business, there are individuals who make statements that you look at and go, that person should not own a gun. But I will tell you, it's not something that is from their core. It comes from just general statements based from no education or proper education of owning the firearms. It's what they hear on TV.
Right.
It's the macho attitude of,
right.
oh, yeah, I'm going to carry the gun. But once you start talking to them and getting down deeper, they see, for example, that it's, oh, well, we're not in that macho attitude. Well, no, I really want it for, and that's where you can weed people out.
Right.
I will tell you that I'm glad that the law allows us to not sell firearms to anybody that we feel is not going to be using it in a proper manner.
Well, in fact, we have to take a break here, but I was just going to make the point, when you say who has the right, sir, you do. In fact, not only do you have the right, you have the obligation, right, to make sure that you don't sell a firearm to the person that you don't believe should have it.
We do. But again, there's a fine line, and that fine line sometimes after the fact you can see where it was blurred.
Right, and I understand that, and that's going to happen. But I'll tell you what, we'll talk more about this on the other side. Marco Caporelli is our guest, or not our guest, but our co-host here on the Second Amendment Hour of Straight Talk from ARN.
Life is full of choices. We make good choices and sometimes bad choices. Well, you can smile and rest easy for a bit because you've made a good choice. Because you're listening to Accent Radio Network. And no, I'm not being arrogant. It's because I've been here for several years, and our main goal or directive is to bring you truth and awareness through our programming. You see, as a form of media, we have a responsibility to deliver information as accurately and truthfully as we can. Now, are all mediums like that? Unfortunately not. There are those who choose monetary gain or better or stronger political positioning than upfront honesty. And that's a real shame because with that mindset, that selfish ambition, no one truly wins, at least not in the long run. So we here at the network want to thank you for listening. We're honored and will go to great lengths to continue bringing you programming that you can truly believe in. Thank you for making that choice. Thank you for listening to Accent Radio Network.
Do you want to listen to Daniel Chapter 1 Health Watch anywhere, both hours? Maybe your radio station only airs the first or just the second hour. Well, now it's possible to hear both. And if you're away from your computer and can't hear our internet streams, no problemo, because of Audio Now. You can call our free dial-in listen lines at 386-524-0333 from any phone, landline, or cell and hear Daniel Chapter 1 Health Watch. There's no charge for the service, so listen as often and long as you'd like. With unlimited long distance on landlines and unlimited voice plans for cells, here's one great way to listen to Daniel Chapter 1 Health Watch, both hours. No software installation or modifications thanks to Audio Now. Just dial 386-524-0333 and listen to Daniel Chapter 1 Health Watch. That's 386-524-0333.
Welcome back to Straight Talk from the Accent Radio Network, 8662-ACCENT. Marco Caporelli of Family Firearms is on with us and is the co-host of our Second Amendment Hour here on Straight Talk. We're talking about the Treyvon Martin and George Zimmerman case in Sanford, Florida. Marco, I down through the years, I've interviewed a lot of people and had a lot of guests on regarding the Second Amendment. And there's been a couple of instances that I've run into where I do have a problem or a potential problem with some people owning a firearm and or carrying one. Let me give you an example. I had a sight-impaired person who wanted to have a concealed weapons permit. I'm sorry, and this person was totally blind. I don't think that a totally blind person should be carrying a firearm. I understand the necessity of protection. I understand that there is the thing that, according to the stories you hear, that hearing is greatly increased and so on. But that, to me, again, is one of those things of an accident waiting to happen, potentially. There was also a situation I knew of who a gentleman was confined to bed. He lived in his home, but he was confined to bed. He was dying. He could not get out of bed. He had to be weighted on hand and foot, so to speak. And he wanted a firearm. And I couldn't help but wonder, does he want a firearm to protect himself? Because he has people around him all the time. Or does he want a firearm to end it when it gets to the point that he says, I can't live like this anymore? And but to me, there are certain instances that are rather tough to make a decision. And as you say, who has the right to do that? Somebody has to have the right to do it. As I say, you have not only the right and the obligation as to sell, to whom to sell, and to whom not to. But would you agree or would you disagree with me that sometimes those lines are so shaded that it's difficult to come to a decision?
Yeah, I do agree, but I got to say this, and maybe maybe I'll get the brunt end of this one, but in the two instances, yeah, I don't think a blind guy needs to have a firearm. I'm probably going to be yelled at for this too, but I don't think a blind guy needs to be able to have a driver's license either. The other side of that is
and yet at all the ATM machines, they have Braille, don't they?
They do. It's odd, but yeah, they do. Or you can plug it in and listen to it, with headphones.
Right.
But the other thing I got to say is with the instance of the individual that you said was bedridden, at least for me, you get that one you get into aside from the whole, okay, yes, I understand the protection side. Maybe he doesn't either trust the people that they would have the intuition or the ability to use force if somebody were to break into the house. But then the other side of that, too, is and maybe it's my libertarian type of thinking, but if the individual wanted to end his life because, for whatever reason, I would hope that he doesn't do that or she doesn't do that. But is it not their option, their choice to do that? And so, therefore, is that a reasoning for me not to give them a firearm because at the last moment when they just don't want to deal with it anymore and they know that they're a burden, and yet other people say, no, you're not a burden. Do you see where I go with that part?
Yeah, but I'm just wondering if the person says, I'd like to have some poison, I'd like to get 12 ounces of poison, and you know the situation, would you want to be the person who sold it to him?
No, but poison has no other reasoning for having it other than to harm.
Well, Drano, Oleander.
Guy's not getting up to clean sinks.
But again, in theory, with people around him, and by the way, this was a man who was in his own home, and it was his family taking care of him, so I don't know there'd be a trust issue there. But I don't know. But I understand that one was a little more difficult than the sight-impaired individual, totally sight-impaired, because, again, I think that's just potentially a very, very dangerous situation. Do you see this being sufficient issue? We've agreed that it's a horrible thing, that it's regardless of what the outcome is, it's bad all the way around. Yeah, but do you see the single issue being enough to take a look at to relook at either the stand your ground or the castle doctrine or the concealed weapons laws in Florida?
Well, I got to tell you, I agree with you in that yes, that this is a tragic issue that happened all around. It's a shame that we have to talk about this. It's a shame that the family has to deal with that they no longer have a child. And and I got to tell you that I'm on the fence of that even with all of the history behind Treyvon, with his Facebook pages and him being kicked out of school for several other reasons, it has nothing to do with what happened. It has absolutely nothing to do with what happened. His character or anything has nothing to do with the fact that if they did, in fact, get into a physical altercation, you cannot paint him as a bad guy from beforehand. We're talking about that specific instance right there. But with that being said, I don't think that the laws, as far as the state of Florida is concerned, or any of the other states that actually have the same laws, I don't think it needs more interpretation. I think it's clear. I think that they specifically state in there what options you have. The issue we have at hand is that there are people, both pro-gun as well as anti-gun, that are misreading and misstating what the statute actually says. Every time we get into this situation, the first thing people talk about is well, he doesn't have the right to use the gun. He used the wrong, and they automatically go to the shooting. And my question always is, listen, the statute specifically states you can use other forces, and they encourage you to use other forces. It's not that the statute needs to change. It's that the individuals who have the access to the firearms need to change the way that they think, change the ways that they consider to react in those instances. It's not the law that needs to be changed. It's the education and the individuals that need to change.
All right. I want to bring up an issue here. If Trayvon Martin had been Latino, or if George Zimmerman would have been black, would you and I be discussing this?
That's a hard one. It's an easy answer, but it's a difficult one. I got to tell you, I don't think we would talk about it in the light that we are now.
Yes,
I think
right.
it definitely would be in the news. I think there would be a lot of issues at hand we still need to, and maybe the focus won't be on it's a black and white thing. It's more of a interpretation or more of a problem with the policy issue. But the one thing I got to say is we look at, you have obviously Reverend Jesse Jackson, you have Reverend Al Sharpton. They were the first on the soapbox to talk about this.
Right.
And of course they bring up the issue of this is a war on African Americans. This is the war on a black population. Yet in 2004 they were vilifying Bill Cosby, who said, "Stop with that. This is not the issue. The issue isn't a black versus white. Stop blaming the white side for it. This is an issue of education, upbringing, morality." And I think in this sense, you look at right off of the bat, these guys were on the soapbox before anybody even knew. But I also have to say that the rebuttals on the other side of that were also fighting more so of the race card versus saying that the light should not be held on whether this is a race issue. It should be held on the policies. What happened? I mean, I got to tell you that the sheer fact that the Sanford Police Department did not provide any information when this happened is the main reason why we are all discussing this, and that it created a huge divide and a circus. They decided not to put any information out, as well as Zimmerman decided to keep hush. And I know that there are other attorneys and other lawyers and other individuals that claim, especially when you're involved with a shooting or something like this, you need to make sure that you stake your claim from the beginning so that there's no question as to what you were doing. Now, you can fight it in court, but at least nobody is thinking, well, the reason he didn't get a lawyer yet or the reason he didn't answer it is maybe he's guilty.
The part that saddens me about this thing, as I said earlier, the poverty pimps and the race baiters, is that it just seems that as a society we have such a hard time uniting, that we're constantly dividing, and that there are certain elements in our society that are looking for two standards. And I don't think you can have two standards. You are aware that a couple of days ago, two young black men beat an elderly 70-plus-year-old Caucasian male in the head with a hammer. Haven't really heard a whole lot about that on the national news. Haven't heard Reverend Jackson or Reverend Sharpton say anything about it. And to me, I don't care what color a person is. I don't care how old they are or young they are. I don't care what gender. I don't care how much money they have or do not have. Their job status, none of that is important to me. The loss of any human life or the injury to any human being in a malicious fashion should be treated the same. And it bothers me that we're having to, well, we don't have to, I guess, but that as a society we are discussing this thing in the light that it has been placed in, as though that because Treyvon Martin was a young black man, that the tragedy, the calamity of his death is greater than that of anybody else of any other color or any other black man if he had been shot and killed by a black man. And to me, there's no place for that in society.
No, there isn't. And I know, especially with Reverend Jesse Jackson, I mean, his issue is why are we now, you know, he's glad, obviously, in his statements that he's made, and he's said this publicly. He's glad that something like this has come to light to where it forces society to get angry about this issue.
Yeah.
However, it's not the first time that we've argued this. This has been going on for decades.
Yes.
And if you look at all the statistics, and the earliest one we have from the Department of Justice, which was 2007, 80% of the crimes on African-American men are from African-American men.
Yes.
12% are from white.
Yeah, where is their love? Where is their concern? Where is their outrage there? And this is the only thing that I'm asking, that of stirring up, whipping up a society. You know, to me, this is no different than I'm sure what happened years and years ago in some of the southern states that I've lived in, when the Klan would have a rally and they would light a cross, as they would say it, and they would say, well, that black man raped a white woman. We got to kill him. We got to lynch him. There's no difference. There's no difference between the Ku Klux Klan and their racism and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and their racism. There's no difference at all.
Yeah, I mean, the argument and the loudness is still there. I got to tell you, I mean, you're right. I think that we need to be upset about this, and we need to scream, where's the humanity, not where's the color. Where's the humanity? And the fact that you have, which really appalled me, of course, I knew that this was going to happen, that you were going to have the Sharptons, you were going to have the Jesse Jacksons, you were going to have everybody else. But to have football players from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going over there and trying to figure out, well, why this and why? Who are you? And
people who have no idea, no concept of what's going on.
Yeah. And it's just to get their name out to what's out there.
That's it.
And it's a tragedy. Again, it's about humanness. It's not about color.
We're down to we're down to roughly our last minute and a half here. All right, tell me about your new store. Tell me about the range and when everything's going to be open and ready to go.
Sure. We are probably about 3 to 3.5 weeks away from the range being completed.
Okay.
We have moved from Brandon to Valrico, literally 2 lights from where we are.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to have, as I said, it's going to be a total of 9 lanes. We have an oversized lane that is for drawing from concealment. The primary reason for that is actually it is handicap accessible. It is a 6-foot wide lane, so anybody who has any kind of handicap issues, physical.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
It's the first, as I know, in Hillsborough County. We are probably going to get in touch with the Wounded Warriors. We want to dedicate it as the Wounded Warrior Lane. So if anybody is listening out there can help us get in touch with them, we would like to make that dedication. And we are, like I said, we will probably be fully up and running by the last week of April, first week of May.
Fantastic. And, of course, you've moved all of your inventory from the Brandon store to the Valrico store?
Yes, we have, and we have more than 5 times the amount we originally had.
Wow.
We will have when the range is fully open.
Give us the website and the address.
Sure. The website is www.familyfirearms.net, and the address now is 106 South St. Cloud Avenue, Valrico, Florida, and you can always give us a call at 813-689-2000.
God bless, sir. Thank you, Lord willing. We'll do it again next week.
Absolutely, Jerry. Thank you very much.
God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm Jerry Hughes for Straight Talk from ARN. God save the Republic of the United States of America.
This program has been brought to you by Accent Radio Network. Copyright 2012. To order a copy of the show, go online to accentradionetwork.com. Radionetwork.com. 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 Radionetwork.com.